Welcome to the Roetzel HealthLaw HotSpot. HealthLaw HotSpot is a podcast for physicians and health professionals that covers the legal issues and trends that affect the healthcare industry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the HealthLaw Hotspot. I'm Ericka Adler, shareholder at Roetzel and Andrus and leader of our healthcare practice group. Today, I have an awesome guest. We're going to be talking with Fiona McEntee, and she is the managing attorney of McEntee Law Group in Chicago. Before I tell you about her, I'm really excited to have her here because we're going to be talking about something a little bit different than we usually do, which are immigration issues that doctors face currently when they're becoming employed, not just doctors, but dentists and other professionals as well. And we're also going to be talking about some very special legislation that Fiona's been involved with that involves entrepreneurials and in which the healthcare community might be very interested. So let me tell you a little bit. Fiona is the chair of the Media and Advocacy Committee for the AILA National and the Media Committee Chair for the Chicago chapter. She's regularly featured in national and international media, including MSNBC, CNN, and the New York Times. Fiona frequently speaks and writes on extraordinary ability visa and green cards and on immigration options for startups, including the new international entrepreneur parole. Fiona was recently asked to submit a statement to Congress on the need for a startup visa and how the outdated US immigration policies push entrepreneurs and startups to other countries. Last year, Fiona wrote and published Our American Dream, an award-winning children's book on immigration. So very accomplished. Welcome. We're glad to have you here, Fiona.
Thank you so much, Ericka. It's great to be here.
Well, so one of the reasons I'm really excited to have you come here, and let's just talk about this first, is that you've been really involved with this new legislation. And at first, I wasn't really sure how it would apply to our listeners, which are primarily people involved in the healthcare community, whether they're practicing professionals or they own surgery centers or they work at hospitals. But the more thought I gave to this, the more I realized that we're really at a turning point in this country when it comes to healthcare. We need new solutions. We need new ideas. There's great technology out there and adventure in new types of opportunities. And so the question is, are we going to be helping people develop this in the United States, or are we going to be turning them away to other countries because we're in desperate need of some of this innovation? So why don't you tell us a little bit about your involvement and what this legislation proposes to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think you did a great summary of the issues that we're facing at present. One thing that I always say to people when we're talking about new immigration options and startup visas is that the US has not had a new immigration option in over 30 years. So when you think about that, what were we doing 30 years ago? We didn't have any of these apps we didn't have phones with internet, with social media, we didn't have telemedicine, we didn't have any of these things available to us. And the world has certainly moved and changed, but yet the immigration system is still stuck back in the early 90s. And we're constantly trying to navigate that system with regards to the, today's changing world. And it's very difficult because a lot of times, we just don't have a good option for people, depending on the specifics, because these options were created so long ago. And I think that that's surprising when people hear that. And one congressional hearing that I participated in recently, I submitted a statement to Congress, but it was actually the title of the hearing was "Oh, Canada," how the outdated US immigration system is pushing top talent to other countries. And there was the strong emphasis on, STEM, whether, it's obviously healthcare, technology, scientists, all that kind of stuff, and how, we're missing out, and we're going to continue to miss out unless we make some changes here.
Well, I think that's really interesting. So what we're really talking about is people in other countries who have ideas, whether maybe it's innovations in telemedicine or new types of healthcare technology, or it could be other industries as well, but really speaking to the people listening to this podcast, healthcare innovation. And if they want to come to the United States and they don't fit into one of the existing immigration categories, or they're all taken up because some of those slots are limited, right? They don't come here. Instead, they're welcome to other countries instead. So we lose out on the opportunity to have that become like an American product and to have them become potentially an American one day, and then to invest and grow their business here. So how would this process work that's being considered?
Yeah, I mean, you're so, like, all of that is totally right. We're missing out. We're missing out on people who would come to the US, and we're also missing out on people who are already here, who are forced to either they kind of end up staying in the situation that they're in, where they're in an employment situation, employer-employee type scenario, so they can't work on their idea that they have. Or they end up going to other countries and starting their companies there. So this specific piece of legislation was introduced by Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, who has been a long supporter of kind of high skilled immigration, and in relation to startup options as well. So I love the acronym of it. It's called the LIKE Act, which it's nice and catchy, but it stands for the Let Immigrants Kickstart Employment Act. And it's just been introduced last week, following lots of kind of discussions, but specifically following that congressional hearing, the House Subcommittee on Immigration and Citizenship. So this is for newly created startups that are created within the US in the past few years. It is for companies that have raised funds. So there's a couple of requirements, and knowing that this is kind of, it's up for debate in Congress. What the requirements that are written right now may not be how it ends up, but as it stands right now, it is for people who have a 10% ownership in a startup that has been created, I believe, in the past 5 years in the US. The startup must have received funds, either 250,000 from like venture capital funds, angel investors, accelerator programs. There's tons of great accelerator programs in Chicago, Matter in the healthcare technology, that's like a big incubator, and there's different accelerators. So 250,000 from that, or 100,000 from certain government grants, for US based government grants. And the idea is that the startup founder would play a central and active role in the startup, and is able to do that and has the skills and knowledge to grow the entity. There's lots of exciting things about this. It's a new W-1 visa that would be created for the startup entrepreneur. There can be a few startup entrepreneurs per company. They can bring potentially some employees with them. Their spouses can come. They can potentially apply for a work permit as well. But the biggest thing is that there would be a path to a green card for the startup entrepreneur, which would not be subjected to limitations on green cards that are available right now. So it's very exciting. We have to put the pressure on Congress to really consider this, because there's a huge need. And I think that this could be so exciting for the healthcare industry. I've seen how the innovative startup healthcare technology device, I mean, there's just so many ways this can apply, I think, to maybe people who are potentially listening to this now.
I think it sounds really exciting, and I'll be really interested to see how that develops, and really some of the feedback that we get when people hear about this. Likely they've not been aware of this potential opportunity, and who knows what route they've been taking. So a couple of other things we want to talk about related to immigration as well has to do kind of with COVID. So, COVID's been going on. We had doctors in this country. There was a lot of talk about, when Trump was still in office, about not letting people into the country. I know doctors were scrambling to get their visas, et cetera. Now, one of the things you and I were talking about before we got online here was that so many physicians in this country working now are not from this country, that when you go into the hospital, you're surrounded by healthcare providers. When you go to the dental office, when you go anywhere you go, the workers, the trained professionals are not necessarily American, although there's plenty of Americans as well. But a lot of these are foreign physicians who are either receiving training here, or they're working here post-training. And they are so important to our healthcare system. We already have a physician shortage. And if we lose these healthcare professionals, we are going to be in dire need. So I guess the question is, what's going on now with the physicians, their ability to get visas? What is the impact COVID is having? What can you tell us?
I mean, COVID has had just such a tremendous impact on obviously all industries. And I have so much respect for all the physicians and for anybody related to the healthcare industry and all the work that they have done in relation to the horrendous pandemic. But I think one thing that, and so I just wanted to point that out, we're so grateful to them for everything they've done. But from our point of view, I think, people didn't really think about how this was going to impact visas and immigration, because essentially it's a global mobility issue, right? Because the pandemic is, we're not permitting international travel. I mean, depending on where you're coming from, there's travel bans, there's embassy closures. We have had huge problems with the Department of State. So the State Department is, embassies and consulates abroad, and they are the ones that are responsible for issuing visa stamps in people's passports so that they can come into the US. And for physicians, depending on, or other healthcare professionals, there can be a variety of visas that they have: J1, H1B, maybe O1, lots of different visa types. But, generally people need that stamp in their passport in order to come in. So we've had huge amounts of issues because the State Department really has not been able to ramp up capacity. Unlike, I would say, a lot of us are figuring out new ways to do our jobs. Doctors are doing appointments via Zoom. We've been urging the State Department to ramp up capacity. AILA, the Bar Association, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, I'm a member and the media chair, as you mentioned at the start. We actually submitted a very detailed policy brief to the State Department about recommendations on how we can reopen America safely. It's not fair that there are people who are working here who are giving such amazing care to Americans and to the public here, and then they can't travel back home for fear of not being able to return. And I've had this issue with clients directly, where we had doctors here in the US who were on J1 visas but needed to leave and needed to get a new visa appointment, and the embassies they couldn't guarantee us that they'd be able to get an appointment. And so people's dads have been sick at home. People's parents are going through cancer treatments. We've had, some of our clients go see Zoom funerals of their parents because they're not able to travel, because they may need a visa stamp. We might not be able to guarantee that they'll get an appointment. It's been really tough. And yes, in theory, we should be able to get expedited appointments for physicians. And there's certain exceptions to various travel bans. But the reality is we're still faced with these tremendous backlogs. And I have sympathy for the Department of State. I know that everybody's, I assume, trying their best. We just think there's more they can do. They can tap into provisions in the law that will enable people to grant visas stateside. There are things that they can do to ramp up capacity here that will help keep everybody safe and will help bring back, either allow people to travel knowing that they'll be able to return, or for people who are stuck abroad, help to get them back quicker, because we do need them. And so I hope that some of our recommendations will be taken on board.
So have there been a limitation though in the number of visas available, or, because of COVID, or is it really just a hardship in getting appointments and stamps? And maybe I don't understand exactly, what the difficulty is.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And we have statistics to show this, that over the past year, there was a 80% reduction in the number of non-immigrant visas issued abroad, 70% reduction in the number of immigrant visas, green cards issued abroad. So that's what we're dealing with. Severe decrease in capacity. Some posts just saying that they're not open and that they're not accepting routine appointments. Some posts, and there's a process where you can renew some visas via mail. Mm-hmm. So the embassy in London has this procedure up on their website that talks about how you can renew via mail. And we had an extraordinary ability client here whose status was approved here, but if he left, he would need a new visa stamp. So we had emailed them to inquire about that, and they said, oh, sorry, we're not actually offering that service, but it's up on their website. We also had a meeting with the visa chief, came to one of our AILA meetings, and he spoke about how they're not offering that service. And to give credit to them, they said they're getting the volume of emails that they would normally get in a year in a month. So we totally appreciate that. But our thing is that we can work together. We have suggestions. We've done a lot of research about how we can all come together to fix this problem, because it is a problem. The travel bans are not helping the situation, because there's various bans from now India, China, Brazil, Schengen, which is basically the majority of Europe, Ireland, the UK. And so if people are there, they have to get a waiver in order to come back in, even if they have a stamp. And so, that's adding to the huge volume of kind of inquiries that these embassies are getting. So I just think the Biden administration honestly needs to step up and work together with us so that it's not fair on visa holders who have done everything right and cannot go back to see a parent dying of cancer for fear that they won't come back in. And that's not right. And we need to do something about that.
Is this, decrease in the number of visas just because of COVID? Is there, is there a political piece to this as well? I guess I had thought that there was a decrease in number of visas being issued. So I don't know, is it just from COVID or is there something bigger going on here?
No, this is specifically in relation to COVID, and it's because of the shutdowns, because of and I understand like countries were locked down. There's certain things that the embassy staff can and cannot do remotely. So there's like capacity issues. I will say though that the State Department, people were leaving the State Department because of things that were happening with the prior administration and policies that were horrendously anti-immigrant. So they were understaffed to begin with. So it's slightly combination of other things. The majority of this is COVID related though, but we've all figured out how to make adjustments. We're now 16 plus whatever. Our kids went to school through Zoom. They did things that I ever imagined through Zoom. This is something that we can figure out. And I've been on Zooms with other representatives of other governments, foreign governments, and they have been able to figure it out. The UK gave automatic extensions to all their healthcare workers. Like, we can do this. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can figure this out. We've given a blueprint in our AILA policy brief, and they've had meetings. Senior AILA representatives had meetings with the administration to discuss this, and so but yet here we are, still not able to get a visa appointment until March of next year in some consular posts. So
that makes sense. I mean, so where there's a will, there's a way, but we haven't really seen I understand the shortage though, for sure. I mean, who isn't suffering a shortage right now? But you're right. If this was important, they could make it happen. So hopefully we'll see something happening soon. Hopefully, fingers crossed, right?
We need to put the pressure on. There's like different take actions that we can do. We can contact our representatives. I'd be happy to share some resources, and I'd be happy to share the AILA brief for anybody who's, this is obviously stuff that I love, reading policy briefs about immigration. I'm not sure that everybody will be, as excited about this as I am, but there's some great practical solutions that we've proposed that I feel like, could be, people could encourage some of the professional representatives to talk about this as well.
I know this topic has been really tough. I work with a lot of clients who are here on visas, and this has been an extremely difficult time for everyone. And you and I were talking, we're both happen to be immigrants, and I'm Canadian, which doesn't sound so crazy, but I literally haven't seen my parents in almost 2 years either because of the visa, the requirements in terms of crossing the border. But I know what that feels like, and it's really stifling. But when your parents are ill or dying, or you have family needs, it's much worse. So one other topic I want to kind of cover with you related to something that my clients have experienced is really how much you are out of control a little bit of your destiny when you're here on a visa. A lot of my doctors take jobs, could be in a healthcare shortage area, for various requirements tied to their visa. And I feel like sometimes, even though the contract they enter into initially will be something very fair, really not super different necessarily from other contracts I look at, over time, I see these clients getting somewhat coerced, working longer hours, taking less vacation, doing work that someone else doesn't want to do. Almost, I hesitate to use the word abusive, but I do feel in some cases it has been quite abusive. And, my clients might find themselves in an impossible position, because if they don't do what they're told to do and they're terminated by the employer, that affects their visa, and you have a very limited amount of time, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, to find a new employer. And everybody knows it takes time to get credentialed and new license, etc. And you could be required to go back to your country of origin while you wait. You may have kids in school, you may have a spouse, who wants that to happen? So I was kind of curious as to whether you've seen this. And, no one really talks about this, but I have definitely seen this abuse occur. And I always feel quite helpless. The most I can do is help my client really try and negotiate with the employer, and short of that, work to find another job as soon as possible.
Yeah, I have seen this too. I really have. And as we were chatting about before, you know, there is an inherent vulnerability that comes with being an immigrant in the US up until you get your green card or some type of permanent status. When you're here on a visa, you know, there is that unease that you, and especially when you're here on an employer sponsored visa like a H-1B or, you know, some other visa where you're dependent on your employer for your status. And, you know, I feel like sometimes where there, you know, there's not an equal bargaining power there, where one party is wholly dependent on the other for their immigration status. And I think that unfortunately we can see some employers try to exploit that, and it's awful because you know, people don't have the luxury of just walking away from it like other people would, right? Like US citizens or green card holders wouldn't necessarily have to you know, they could just walk away and get another job, and they don't need to worry about their immigration status, their kids, you know, in school. It's just a different type of impact on somebody else. And so I have seen that too. And I think that, you know, obviously there are employment laws, and there's, you know, certain things that the employers must make sure they're doing. H-1B visas are approved, you know, as they're approved by the USCIS and things like that. But I do see that, and I have seen that, and I think I actually saw that more over the past few years with the Trump administration. I felt like immigrants have never been more anxious. They were never more anxious and never more vulnerable, I think, because of there was just so much anti-immigrant rhetoric, anti-immigrant policies, so many things that really made people feel like they were other, you know, it was like us and them type of thing that made people feel that way. And I feel like maybe employers were, you know, it's exploiting some of that as well. And so I definitely did see that. And it's tough because if you're here in an employer sponsored visa, if you get terminated, like you said, you may have a limit depending on what status you're in and the terms of your visa. You have a limited time that you need to transfer it. So hopefully with immigration reform, there may be some, you know, options for physicians. I know there've been some, you know, different pieces of legislation, like, you know, obviously the startup visa is something, but there's other pieces of comprehensive legislation. There's some great healthcare immigration groups that are pushing for things as well that would potentially maybe alleviate some of this, because if people could get green cards in a different way, and then maybe they wouldn't have this type of vulnerability. So that's something that we'll be watching as well.
I think that's so great. And I'm anxious to kind of see whether we see these kind of changes. And I see that happening more often than you would expect. And, you know, as a lawyer, we feel kind of helpless as well, because some of these nuances are not illegal. They don't necessarily violate employment law, but they can really just hurt a physician and, you know, make the physician extremely unhappy and pretty desperate. So, you know, one of the greatest things you said to me before we got online was that, you know, anywhere you look, any hospital you're in, you're surrounded by, you know, a multitude of different specialties made up of people from a variety of countries, right? And not a single day goes by that I don't speak with, you know, 5 to 10 different doctors from different countries. You know, more than almost any specialty or any industry I'm aware of, the healthcare industry is composed of just people from all over the world who help, you know, keep our healthcare system alive, take care of us. And to me, I really think immigration and healthcare is such an important issue. I'm not an immigration lawyer, obviously, and I'm on the periphery of it, but definitely my clients are impacted by it. And really appreciate you coming here today to talk about some of these issues. And I hope for everyone listening out there, if you want to know more about either the potential changes to immigration related to being an entrepreneur, or more about some of these other immigration issues that we talked about, that you are welcome to reach out to Fiona directly or me, and I'll make an introduction. And certainly we didn't cover every possible question that's out there, but I thought these were really ones that everybody would be interested in hearing about. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share with us?
I mean, just to kind of reiterate what you just said there about when I was giving birth to my daughter here in Illinois Masonic Hospital, the room was, you know, my nurse was from Nigeria, the anesthesiologist was Iranian, there was me, there was just people from, you know, another Polish nurse from all over. And you know, I just have so much respect, and I value so much the work that immigrants do here across all industries. And also, when not everybody wants to stay in America forever as well. You know, some people want to come here for training and go back home. And I have been the beneficiary through our family. My cousin had cancer, and we had an amazing oncologist in Dublin who got training in Sloan Kettering, and was like, you know, because of the training that he got, he brought that back to Ireland and has, you know, enriched the medical industry there by his knowledge. So, I mean, I just think we need to remember this when we're talking about immigration, that, there's and not everybody wants to stay here, but for people that do, we should make it easier. And I think in relation to the point that we just mentioned previously about abusive and inequality, I think American peers in those situations have a duty and a responsibility to speak out as well on behalf of their immigrant colleagues. And I always take that responsibility very seriously for advocating for others. And so I think maybe as a takeaway, that there are things that we can do to advocate for our immigrant friends, colleagues, neighbors, and your voice can always be heard, and it can be impactful in ways, lots of different ways that you can use your voice, whether it's, exercising it to the employer if there's unequal treatment, or contacting your member of Congress for some type of immigration reform. And so I think to be aware, just to listen and act as well, and know that your immigrant neighbors and friends are not as secure as maybe you are. And so just one final thought on that.
Right. I appreciate that. And you often don't think of physicians or dentists being, insecure in terms of their position. We often assume that, they're just fine and you don't need to worry about them. But anybody here on any kind of immigration status has that insecurity. So I think, especially given how much we're relying on our healthcare workers in this country, that's definitely something to think about. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We loved having you. This has been the HealthLaw Hotspot. We thank Fiona McEntee for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
The Roetzel HealthLaw Hotspot is made available by the firm and its attorneys for educational purposes and to provide general information, not to provide specific legal advice. Use of the Roetzel HealthLaw Hotspot does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and the firm or any of its attorneys. The Roetzel HealthLaw Hotspot should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice, and you should contact an attorney in your state about any legal needs or questions you may have.